Hello, and welcome to Booked on Shalom World TV. I'm your host, Claire Hinshaw. Today we are speaking with Antony Barone Kolenc, a law professor, podcaster, speaker, and author of award-winning fiction and nonfiction, including tonight's book, The Merchant's Curse. This medieval historical novel is an installment of Tony's Hardwood Mysteries, an award-winning fiction series for youth published by Loyola Press. Tony is the host of The Shepherd's Pie, an ecumenical radio show and podcast that focuses on youth issues. He also writes short stories and pens a regular legal column in Practical Homeschooling magazine. In his professional life, Tony teaches law and authors legal casebooks, book chapters, and journal articles on matters of constitutional law, homeschooling law, and military policy. He retired as a lieutenant colonel from the U.S. Air Force Judge Advocate General's Corps after 21 years of military service, where he litigated civil and criminal cases before trial and appellate courts and taught at the Air Force Academy. He and his wife Alyssa homeschooled their 5 children. Tony, welcome to Booked.
Claire, it is so great to be here tonight. Thank you.
Well, I'm very excited because we're doing a young adult novel for the first time on the show tonight. And so I'd like to start off just asking what drew you to that genre and that audience?
Well, I guess I'm a kid at heart, but I also am the father of 5 kids that we were homeschooling. And when I started the very first book in the Hardwood Mysteries, which is called Shadow in the Dark, my son was a teenager and, we were... the books that are out there, Harry Potter and those types of books, which were fine books, but, were books that I thought, it would be nice to have a series that was just as good as Harry Potter, just as exciting and adventurous and spooky, but also had really good themes and values and Judeo-Christian values in it. And so that's kind of what made me think, well, let me see if I could take a hand at this. And that was over 15 years ago, and it's taken almost that long to finally get to the point where I think the books were finally at a high enough level of quality that Loyola Press was able to put them out starting in 2020.
Wow. I love that can-do attitude that, well, we need this and I'm going to do it. That's so wonderful. And now, as you referenced and we referenced in the intro, it's a historical fiction novel, and it's set in the 12th century, if I remember correctly. I'd love to know what drew you to that particular time period. It doesn't seem like an obvious choice.
Well, it is. It's a little obvious when you think about some of my ulterior motives with the history here. I'm homeschooling at the time when I started this. Homeschooling essentially middle schoolers and high schoolers. And of course, in any social studies or world history curriculum, you're going to come across the Middle Ages, the Crusades, feudalism, Western monasticism. And so I looked, and I for some reason, I don't know why, I'm mostly Italian, but I like England, and I've always been a bit of an Anglophile on English history. And so when I started looking at what time frame would it be cool to set this in, the end of the 12th century, it starts in 1184, came to my mind. It's the very end of King Henry II's reign, so the very beginning of the Plantagenet dynasty, and it's just a few years before the Third Crusade is about to begin. Saladin is about to take back Jerusalem for Islam, and so there's a big King Richard the Lionheart's about to come in. Anyway, there's a lot of excellent historical things that were going on during this exciting time in history, and so I said, let's do it then.
I love that. Yeah, it's interesting because it is, I think the Middle Ages period makes sense, but it's great that you were able to kind of zero in on one particular time period in there. And I never would have known all those things were happening at this particular time. Now, continuing with talking about the historical elements of the book, I really appreciated that right at the beginning you had a sort of guide to how to read historical fiction. And something that jumped out at me from that was you suggest to the reader that he should think about the similarities and differences between the characters' lives in the book and our modern lives. And reading that got me wondering if there were any specific similarities or differences that you were trying to highlight in the book.
Well, partly, I mean, I wanted the books to be accessible to a modern audience. I mean, there's plenty of wonderful, awesome classics that our kids can read, but they don't read like modern books do. So, on the one hand, I wanted the books to be accessible, and by doing that, I wanted kids to see that, kids even 1,000 years ago had the same kinds of struggles that we have today. They still had these coming of age ideas. What does God want me to do with my life? And, what are my parents wanting me to do? And, when bad things happen to them, they're asking questions about God and their faith. And so I wanted, I guess, my characters to be relatable to a modern audience, not to be lost to history somehow. And I need to say Loyola actually was the one who suggested that we put that section at the beginning. And I love that they did that because exactly like you said, I mean, the books are meant to be read as a way to not just enjoy a great story, but for kids to learn about history and to even use them in a curriculum. In some schools, they're using the books in their literature or their social studies classes to supplement their curriculum. So I definitely am glad that we're focusing on the history piece of it.
I just have to say real quick, I love that you mentioned they're being used in schools. I remember probably 10 years ago when my brother was in middle school, in public school, and my mom was just so disappointed with the literature that they were giving them and searching for other books to read. So it's so great that you're giving parents these resources now and that the schools are picking up on them too. That's so wonderful. But transitioning a little bit now, it struck me that you do delve into some hard issues a little bit in the book. And I was wondering how you approached addressing those for a younger audience.
Yeah, so I'm always trying to balance, I want the books to be accessible to kids age 10 and up. I also want them to be, true to life as much as any novel can be. And in life, there are bad things and hard things that happen to us, and then they happened in the Middle Ages too. And so I didn't want the books to be sort of saccharine sweet, where they didn't really reflect the reality that we all, struggle with when we're growing up or when we're adults too. So, it's always trying to find that balance between like, how do I address some of these issues, like Zan's, for instance, in book one, Zan loses his family essentially, and he has to deal with, he also loses his memory, but he has to deal with not only who am I, but what happened to my family? Why did this happen? And then in book two, he's got to deal with the guy who actually was responsible for the death of his family and forgiving, or he doesn't want to forgive. He hates this guy. And so, kind of working with Zan through that, and I wanted it to be presented again in a way that would be realistic. Like, what would it be like if, you knew somebody did something terrible to your family and now you had to be with them and talking to them and yet, that God you're being told by the monks that Jesus wants you to forgive and love your enemies and this kind of thing. And, they're hard topics, but I wanted them, that's partly what makes the series really exciting to me, is that, we can address all sorts of really hard topics, but in a way that would still be age appropriate and would not leave the reader with a sense of depression or despair, but a sense of hope and redemption, which is what I always go for, in the books.
I have to say, as you were talking there, this quote was coming into my mind. I think it's from Chesterton, but maybe C.S. Lewis. But one of them said something along the lines that it's important for children to read fairy tales and learn about dragons, not so that they know dragons exist, but so they know that dragons can be beaten. And it sounds like you're kind of playing into that with these books, which is such a great thing for these young people to read. But finally, I'm curious, towards the end of the book, you really focus in on the vice of vanity, which is not something we usually hear a whole lot about. I'd really love to know why you thought that was an important topic to address.
So each of the books in the Harvard Mysteries, there's four and counting. Next year there'll be a fifth one coming out. Each one sort of has a theme that is being dealt with. The first one was about suffering and and death. The second one is about forgiveness. The third one's about pride. So the fourth one, The Merchant's Curse, is the theme is the vanity of things in this world and how none of them really can save us in the end. And I based this on the book of Ecclesiastes, which is one of my favorite books in the Bible. It starts off with King Solomon, not really King Solomon, but sort of King Solomon saying, vanity of vanities. And then it goes through and shows us how he saw all these different things, and even wisdom, when it was being sought after for its own sake, was a vanity. And so for book 4, I wanted to bring forth this theme that we have to focus on the things to come, the things in the other world, not in all the things that we can try to achieve in this world, because we have to live our lives the way that God wants us to live our lives. And so all the different characters sort of are dealing with different aspects of vanity, whether it's the vanity of how they look, with Christina, the main female character, whether it's Zan, who's trying to, chase wisdom. One of the characters, of course, is chasing money. Another one is chasing, high, friends in high places. So like power, worldly power. And you kind of see how each of them are going to learn that those aren't going to be the things in the end that really matter, when your life is over.
I love hearing you break it down like that into all these kind of different individual vanities and how any person can be taken in by vanity because it can come in all these different forms. I think that's a really important, interesting take. Well, unfortunately, we're at the end of the interview already, but it has been wonderful talking with you, Tony, and I'm so excited that we're able to share this book with our viewers and hopefully a lot of young adults.
Thanks so much for having me on the show. I really appreciate it. All right, for my excerpt, I want to read from book 4 in the Harwood Mysteries, The Merchant's Curse. And in this book, my main character, Zan, has returned to Lincoln, England in 12th century. And I want to just read the beginning to kind of give the readers a sense of the world that my main character is in before this adventure starts, where he winds up meeting this witchy woman and having to deal with a curse. So I'm going to read from chapter 1, called Ruins. Zan stood alone amid the rubble of Lincoln Cathedral. The sinking red sun cast shadows on the dirt from the jagged stones that once had soared over the cathedral's nave. The terrible earthquake of 1185 had ripped apart the church, which had lain in ruins for much of 1186. This very month of August, laborers finally had come to smash the cathedral's shaky walls, except its solid western wall, which the quake had spared. Brother Andrew's final bit of advice back at Harwood Abbey seemed doubly true in all this wreckage. Do not trust the vanities of this life, Zan. Those who seek them are chasing after wind. The black-robed monk had spoken those words more than 9 months ago, just before Zan had ridden to Lincoln to become Uncle William's apprentice in his merchant shop. If he were here, Brother Andrew, actually they called him Father Andrew now that he was a priest, probably would raise a hand and point to these ruins as proof of the world's vanity. He'd marvel at how this once proud cathedral suffered humiliation each day at the sweaty hands of the workers digging up its broken statues, rusted candlesticks, and shards of colored glass. A lark's song ended, replaced by a cry for help. Surely that wasn't one of the workers shouting out. They'd already left for the night, down the steep road that separated the cathedral from the thick walls of Lincoln Castle. Zan, help! That was Simon's voice. The boy must have followed him to this place. Maybe Simon had been hurt in the rubble. Coming! He hurled an iron pole and dashed past a chunk of wall toward the cry. This was no place for a 10-year-old boy. That's why he hadn't brought Simon to begin with. There were too many hidden hazards, even places where a bandit could hide. As he turned the final corner, a bit too sharply, his brown tunic caught on the edge of a stone and tore. There stood Simon. Sure enough, the boy had strayed into the dangerous area the workers had blocked off. Zan, I'm in trouble. Sweaty clops of hair framed Simon's grimy face, and a soiled shirt hung over the ripped black pants covering his gangly legs, proof of how much trouble he was in. I see that. Simon was stranded on a jutting island in a sea of destruction. He had climbed onto one of the pillars the quake had hurled into the crypt, which must have shifted under the boy's weight, creating a void. One wrong step, and he would plunge headlong into the debris-filled pit. And from there, Zan has to figure out how to save Simon from falling into the crypt that's in the ruins of Lincoln Cathedral. When I was a teenager reading The Lord of the Rings by J.R.R. Tolkien, and you get to the end of the third book, The Return of the King, the scene where Samwise comes back after leaving Frodo, and Samwise comes back to his family, and he sees his wife and his child. I remember reading that scene, and it invoked such a sense of melancholy and just, I don't know, different feelings inside of me as a reader. And, out of all the books that I've read throughout my life, that scene at the end still came back to me. And it made me realize, you can really move a person with words. I mean, like nobody was there reading that to me. And yet I had this, great emotional response to it. And I think that was one of the things that made me want to be an author and to write, books and stories, especially that might move an audience. Because I write historical fiction, I have to do a lot of research, and I found with my Harwood Mysteries series, which takes place in 12th century England, after kind of exhausting all the resources at the library and on the internet, I wound up having to go to an expert. I actually went to somebody at Catholic University who was an expert in 12th century English monasticism, which is perfect because that's when the book takes place. Her name is Dr. Jennifer Paxton, and she worked with me, especially on book 1, Shadow in the Dark, with getting all the historical details and the world building in place so it would resemble what was going on in 12th century England. I also, by the way, took a trip to England in 2015 and went all about to the different areas where I'm writing about in these books. And I just had a blast sort of doing what I call my Zan research tour to get a flavor of the areas where I was writing. As I was mentioning J.R.R. Tolkien earlier, he is, of course, probably one of my all-time favorite Catholic authors. When I think about Catholic fiction, I do actually like to read a lot of young adult Catholic fiction. And so if you ever go to a website called CatholicTeenBooks.com, there's about 16 of us. I'm one of these authors. There's 16 Catholic authors on there. And I love all of the stuff that I read on there from those authors. Another favorite of mine, of course, is Jacqueline Brown with her Light series books. And we kind of read each other's series, obviously. What I love about reading a story is that you can basically be transported not only into other worlds, you can be transported into other minds. You can get into the head of other people and actually see the world through their eyes. And it really is transformative in a way that I don't think movies can be, or obviously listening to, just music. I mean, that's all transformative in its own way. But when you hear a story, when you read a story, that, the words form their own image in your mind like they will in nobody else's mind. And so it's almost like the story becomes tailored just for me, with the way the characters look, the way they sound, the way things look. And that really just excites me that words have that power. I think what was most surprising was how much I see myself in all my different characters, whether I'm a monk, whether I'm an 11-year-old girl, whether I'm my main character, Zan. It seems like I can find my own personality sort of creeping out in the words and the thoughts of all these different characters. And I realized, gosh, there's so much of me that I wind up putting. And when I talk to other authors, they say a similar thing. It's almost like all the characters are somehow a reflection of myself in some way. And then I guess maybe that surprised me as I was writing, and then especially when I go back and hear and read my characters' words and thoughts, and I realize, how much of them, are part of who I am.
Well, so we came upon the books because I am also an author, and I am friends with Tony, the author of the Harwood Mysteries. And I brought them home to my sons, who Samuel is my oldest, and Matthew is just turned 11. So that's how we were introduced to the books. And Samuel has just devoured them and read them multiple times over and over again. What do you like about the books?
I like that they immediately pull you in. It doesn't take time for them to develop it. Draws you in.
Do you like the characters?
Yes, I do. Like them.
What's the setting like?
I really like medieval times.
So the setting is?
Yes, the setting's great.
Okay.
I really like the descriptions he put them.
Okay. Is it very adventurous?
Yes, it is.
Mm-hmm.
I also really like mysteries, so it's nice when he draws mystery and adventure together.
Nice. Who would you recommend to read these books?
People that have active imaginations.
Oh. Because is he a very visual writer?
Yes, he is, yes.
Very nice. What about age? What do you think is a good age to start reading these books?
10 to 10.
Starting at 10?
Yes,
okay.
At 10.
Okay. And I know that he's written really strong boy characters and girl characters, so it's probably a good book for both boys and girls.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So we highly recommend them. It's also really nice as a mom. I don't worry about the content, so I feel very comfortable with my kids reading the books. And it teaches a lot of virtue and self-sacrifice. And he'll bring in different kind of analogies around the Bible. And I think, don't the books take place in England. Monasteries?
Yeah, England monasteries.
Monasteries in England. So it's really cool. So we are big fans.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and the last book, the most recent book, is The Merchant's Curse. And you have loved it, right?
Yeah.
How many times have you read it?
5.
Mm-hmm. How many times have you read the other ones?
10 to 20.
10 to 20. Okay. So we are big fans in our home.
And thank you to all of you for tuning in to Booked. We'll be back next week with another episode. Until then, happy reading.
Are you searching for fulfillment? Discover true happiness. Stay tuned to Shalom World.